And this is a warning for any of you that work in the healthcare profession, any of you that have been nurses, or you still are a nurse. This story here, what happened to this nurse in Boston? Now, when I read the title, some of you might laugh. When I first read the title, I was like, what the hell? But when we get into the story, I don't think it will be as funny to you anymore. Boston nurse drives off the top floor of a hospital garage after shift. I kid you not. This was sent to me yesterday. I was exhausted. Boston nurse drives off the top floor of the hospital garage after the shift. So this is like, you guys know, those parking garage. And a lot of times if there's no parking on the lower levels, sometimes you may have to drive all the way up to the rooftop and you may have to park there. That's where she was parked. Let's get into this. This is a warning for everyone. I wish I could make the text bigger. Okay, there we go. Nurse professionals called it a dramatic example of what can go wrong when healthcare workers don't get enough sleep. Boston police say that early the morning of May 17th, an officer arriving at Faulkner Hospital saw a heavily damaged white Grand Cherokee, part of Faulkner's parking garage guardrail missing on the top floor, and an injured woman being attended to by paramedics. Boston Fire told the officer that somehow the woman had driven the vehicle off the top floor of the garage. A source tells Boston 25 News that an exhausted on-call nurse fell asleep after putting the car into reverse. Where are my nurses at? Anybody in the chat a nurse? Anyone in the chat, have you been a nurse? Do you have nurses in your family? Do you have friends that are nurses? My best friend is a nurse and she hates it. Passionate about helping people, but hates being a nurse. And she has told me this for years, that it is so stressful and she is so tired. I see a couple of them in here. Retro Gamer says, my half aunt is a nurse. Wary said, I have nurses in my extended family. Richie said, I've dated nurses. You're cute, Richie. Raul says, girl is a nurse. Or maybe you mean my girl is a nurse. Yeah. Zach said, my mom is a nurse practitioner, 7 days on, 7 days off. See, we're going to get to this because, all right, we got a nurse. Cemeterian nurse here. Okay. Because I think sometimes when people hear that you're a nurse and you say you work 3 12-hour shifts and you have 4 days off for the rest of that week, I don't think a lot of people understand what it's like to be on your feet for 12 hours a day in a stressful job, especially if you're a nurse that works at a hospital. It is tiring. Then you have to deal with angry, cranky patients. My friend has told me that it's easier to deal with children patients than it is to deal with the adults. She said the adult patients are the worst ones. And then on top of that, the abuse from hospital administration. We'll get into that as well. So it says, this is what happens. The police report said the woman hit the gas instead of the brake and the car toppled off the garage front first. The woman told police she had finished working her shift, but was on call beginning at 11 p.m. She decided that rather than go home, she would sleep in her vehicle. Around 1 a.m., she moved to get away from lights, and that is when the incident happened. An employee at Faulkner tells Boston 25 the vehicle landed on a nearby shed before tumbling into a brushy area off to the side. So this is Mass General Brigham. There's the garage that's attached to it there. Massachusetts Nurses Association spokesperson Joe Markman confirmed the driver was a nurse. While this incident was particularly dramatic, MNA said it is not uncommon for nurses to be involved in accidents on the way home because of extreme fatigue brought on by long shifts, sometimes compulsory overtime, and a lack of adequate help. It is unknown what level of exhaustion this nurse was experiencing, nor her working conditions. So, again, a lot of times nurses will just stay at the hospital if they're on call. It doesn't make sense for them to go home because as soon as they get home, they may have to turn right back around and come back to the hospital. So that doesn't sound unfamiliar to me. But working these on-call shifts, 12 hours a day, constantly on your feet, 7 days on or 7 days off, like it's not healthy. It's not healthy. It goes on to say Rebecca First knows all about dealing with fatigue. She recently retired after more than 40 years as a nurse, most recently at Newton Wellesley Hospital. I really sympathize with the nurse, and I can certainly understand how it happened. I don't think people realize how exhausting this job is. First said the public underestimates the physical and emotional toll on nurses just from doing their jobs, from moving heavy patients to the stress of engaging in life-saving procedures to coping with death. I mean, I have driven home from working nights with the window open, slapping my face to keep myself awake. Samaritarian here says, just today, I got cursed out by my patient for being 10 minutes late bringing her pain medications. Yeah, it's a doozy, you guys. It's something else. It goes on to say nurses make up the largest portion of the U.S. healthcare team, but recent studies make clear that working conditions are having an effect on those numbers. In fact, the American College of Nursing recently reported that a quarter of registered nurses plan to leave the profession one way or another in the next 5 years. Mass General Brigham said they are investigating the incident, but could not confirm the injured party was an employee, let alone a nurse, of course, right? First said the incident is a cautionary tale that some things in nursing have to change. It was a 22-mile drive for me when I worked, and I was exhausted. And you don't want to get in an accident. There's got to be a different way. There's got to be a different way. I want you to hear from a nurse. I was listening to this earlier today. This video was titled, Nursing is Abuse, the Truth About Being a Registered Nurse. We're going to focus on two parts of this video. The first part is the abuse part. Listen to this. This is a nurse, a registered nurse. Listen to what she says.
I'm just very grateful for the other areas of nursing that there are, because the hospital just ain't it. And I've worked at 2 different hospitals now, and I feel the same way about both of them, even though I worked in 2 different departments within those hospital systems. So what does that tell you? In addition, contrary to popular belief, there is no nursing shortage, you guys. There are tons of nurses out there. They just will not accept this level of abuse anymore from these hospital systems, and they are choosing to walk away from bedside nursing or just exploring a different career altogether. If you think about it, guys, think about the amount of nurses that graduate nursing school each year. These institutions and these academic academies are pushing out nurses like no tomorrow, because they know that people are walking away from bedside nursing and there's going to be virtually no one to care for people in the hospitals. Now, I promise this video isn't going to be all about like bashing nursing altogether, because I think nursing is an awesome profession that has the potential of being so good. And one thing I'm really grateful for as a nurse is the opportunity and ability to work in all different types of areas. So as nurses, we are no longer restricted or limited to just working at the bedside. Hallelujah, because bedside nursing, it literally feels like an abusive relationship at times. Let me just explain. Nursing will give you just enough reward and satisfaction as you care for people who are very ill or people who are just grateful for your time and education. Those moments will be so rewarding that it will give you just enough to want to stay, But then the other 90% of your shift and your day-to-day job responsibilities are absolutely horrible and abusive. And nursing truly is abuse, especially in the emergency room in the setting that I work in. You know, we're dealing with patients at the acute stages of their illness. We're getting alcohol withdrawal patients. We're getting patients who are experiencing acute episodes of dementia. So yeah, it's
Pause there for just a second, because this is something I want to touch on, and that's the psych issue. Not every hospital has a psych ward. Ding, 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 surprise. Not every hospital has a psych ward. So if you have to work in the emergency room and you have patients that come in that are having an episode and that hospital does not have a psych ward, imagine trying to deal with that when you're not trained to deal with that. And there are hospitals like that. So you heard what she just said, what you're dealing with. Listen, I was at the ER one time. I'll never forget this. I was at the ER one time. This is when I was in undergrad. My roommate was really, really sick. And so we took her to the ER. Anyway, we're in the waiting room. While I'm in the waiting room, the things that I saw come through the ER, there was a guy that walked in that was holding, his shirt on top of his head because someone stabbed him in the head. That came through. There was another person that came through. They were in a wheelchair, but they were intoxicated, so they were falling out of the wheelchair. All this is happening at the same time. Also, it just so happens a lot of times when you come in there late at night, we only have one doctor on duty. We only have 2 nurses on duty. So imagine having to deal with that. Now, again, 12-hour shift, having to deal with that. I'll let her go on some more here.
It's going to be kind of ugly, right? Like, you're not going to get the best of the best in that setting, and I understand that. And sometimes it's actually very rewarding to see people come out of those stages as you treat them, and then they're like, oh my God, I did what? They're actually very grateful for how we cared for them. And those moments are awesome. But let me tell you, they are so few and far between that, like I said, a majority of your shift, especially in the ER, is not going to be like that. I have been spit on, punched, kicked, sworn at, accused of doing horrible things that I didn't do because the patients aren't in their right state of mind. These are really tough things to go home with. And on top of that, that might be just one patient. My other patients might be, about to pass away or did pass away, and you have to go into another room and talk to the family and act like nothing happened. Nursing is really, really freaking hard, and I don't think that our hospital administrations are making it any easier on us. I think the older generations sometimes like to say that, the newer generation of nurses are whiny or they complain a lot, but honestly, guys, back in the day, they might have been very grateful to have a job, and that's great, but you can be grateful for the position that you're in and simultaneously not tolerate abuse. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is we can be grateful for our jobs. Of course, I'm grateful to have a job that allows me to care for people and in some cases allows me to be financially independent. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I should go into work every day knowing that I'm going to be verbally abused. And going back to patients being in the acute episodes of their illnesses, honestly, guys, like, that doesn't really excuse a whole lot, because again, your hospital administration and your managers should have things set up in place that still protect their nurses and protect their staff. And the crazy part is, if that type of abuse was going on, that verbal abuse, physical abuse was happening in any other industry, it would not be tolerated. I cannot just walk into a restaurant or a grocery store and start swearing at everybody and calling them names and acting a fool without being kicked out. I mean, they would not serve me. But in nursing and in healthcare, for some reason, you are expected to just tolerate it. They will tell you, well, that's just how nursing is. Well, no.
Let me pause there for just a second, because something else I want to add. Higher ed is like that too. It can be very abusive, particularly from faculty. Faculty can be very abusive. Just giving you a heads up about that if you're thinking about going into higher education, folks.
That's wrong. And if that's going to be how nursing is, then we have to have things set up in place that make us feel safe to be able to do our jobs. And one thing I'm very sick and tired of hearing is, but you're a nurse, you're supposed to care for people. Typically, people who are drawn to nursing or healthcare in general, they are naturally empathetic people, right? And so the healthcare system loves to prey on these types of people because they will make you feel guilty for wanting to leave a job. They'll hit you with that exact line of, but what about the patients? Like, well, if you really cared about the patients, you would A, properly staff us, pay us more, give us, logistics and policies put in place to help us do our jobs safely and effectively.
Yep.
I mean, it's no longer about the patients, you guys. It never truly has been. I don't want to come for Big Pharma and say that they're all horrible, because they're not. But at the end of the day, the pharmaceutical industry is a billion-dollar industry. So just take that into consideration.
So she has excellent points here, because it's true. It is a billion-dollar industry, but I've seen it before myself. Like, how many times have you guys have ever had to be in this situation? But if you're in the ER or whatever, or I say the ER because the hospital treatment and a clinic are two different things, right? So if you have to go to the ER, and you could be sitting in the room when they finally bring you back there, and then a nurse will come in and say, let me check your vitals and all that kind of stuff. And then someone else will come in like an hour later, and it's a different nurse, and they'll ask to do the same thing. And you'll say, okay, that's already been done, but that wasn't communicated between the other. It's just the ER is god awful. And I always say, like, to nurses and doctors that work in the ER, God bless them, because there's no way I could do it. There's no way. It's a lot going on around there, especially late at night. But this isn't just unique to nursing. Anyone who is working a job where you're working these long hours and you're not getting enough rest, this can happen to you too. The nurse that drove off of the top floor of the garage building, that isn't unique just to nursing. That can happen to anyone who is working these long jobs. Someone mentioned waiters. Aussie waiters should get paid $500 an hour. When I waited tables, it wasn't uncommon on the weekend for me to work double shifts. And those are long days. So you may have to work lunch and dinner, or breakfast and lunch, or breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you get a little break in between to eat your food, to have time to eat. But the reality is, that's another thing people may not realize if you never waited tables. If your server is waiting on you during dinner time, chances are your server has not eaten dinner. We would usually eat after the shift. So things have got to change, folks. And I agree with her when she talks about there's no nursing shortage. No, it's just people don't want to put up with this anymore, man. So imagine like having to deal with that all the time. And then you have to get into your car, and then you have to drive home, and things just need to change. People need to have enough rest. People shouldn't have to work these long ass hours. I don't agree with people being on call. When I interviewed the railroad workers, I told them the same thing. I do not agree with these jobs making it mandatory for you to be on call. That's just me, you know, but something has to change. But again, the reason why this exists is because the pharmaceutical industry is a billion-dollar industry, and they are exploiting the nurses. So don't get it twisted. Don't think that just because someone's an RN, oh, she's an RN, she's probably making a lot of money. They're not making what they should make. And if you're working those long shifts, do you really get time to enjoy those days off in the week that you have? Do you really get time to do that? Everyone I know that has been a nurse hates being a nurse. Everyone I know. So we have to think about these things. Like when it comes to the labor industry, let's go to part 2, Eric, when you're ready for the Trump story. When it comes to labor, the workers are exploited. And it makes you wonder what's going to happen in the future. We can go to part 2, Eric, when you're ready. It makes you wonder what's going to happen in the future. But it's a mess. It's a mess. Aye. But I'm glad that she is okay. Because when I read the headline, I was like, holy shit. And she's alive. But I'm glad that she's okay. All right, let's go to the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Zach. Billionaires shouldn't exist, and I stand by that. I agree. I agree with you, Zach. Thank you, Courtney. We might owe Suge Knight an apology at this point, LOL, By the way, congratulations on the 100K subs. Started from the bottom. Now we're here. That's really sweet, Courtney. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot about Shug. Brooke says this is not isolated to only nurses. You're right. You're right. Thank you. None of your business. Robots will take the job. They won't take any shit. I think you mean they won't take any shit. Thank you. Where's the love? Imagine a nurse having up to 20 patients per shift. And I'm telling you, my best friend told me, she said, it's easier to deal with children patients than it is to deal with the adult patients. She said the adults can be the worst. Thank you, Sparky. VA hospitals tend to have better working conditions than civilian hospitals. Problem is, everyone can't work at the VA hospital, but I hear you. Thank you, none of your business. Robots will do surgery, diagnosis, clean, admin. That's scary. That's a scary thought.